Hey, welcome. It's Brian, and today we are going to go through Guitar Player's top 25 prog rock guitar players. And I happened to see this issue pop up when I was looking at Prog Magazine and some other magazines talking about King Crimson. And this popped up, and I thought it was like this month's edition. And so, anyways, I kind of sought it out and come to find out it's basically from 3 years ago. So, anyway, I kind of wanted to go through it real quick and kind of get your thoughts on it. I know my thoughts and kind of see if they leave anybody out. And I'm sure they will. There is a wide variance, or there's a lot of people that could be accepted as prog rock guitar players. I have my list, and I'm sure many of you have people that I've never heard of, and maybe I have a few you haven't heard of. So that's a pretty wide net. We'll go through the top 25 somewhat quickly, and I'll maybe offer some opinions, or maybe not, because I may not know who they are or whatever. And I'll definitely have some additions at the end. And we can kind of open it up a little bit at the end and talk about players that might have dipped their feet into kind of prog rock. And to be honest, with prog rock, it's kind of like, I don't know necessarily how to always describe it, but I know it when I hear it, kind of thing. The top 25 essential prog rock guitar players goes like this, according to Guitar Player magazine. Frank Zappa. I guess you can definitely say he's a prog rock player just because he's a rock player and he has lots of elements. He brings in a lot of orchestration, like in the late 60s, early 70s, and throughout his career. But that kind of late 60s, early 70s is where he's kind of what I would maybe consider prog rocky, would be where that falls. I kind of consider him an island unto himself kind of thing. But anyway, I'm sure we can all consider him a prog rock guitar player or not. Robert Fripp, of course, my kind of top 5 guitar players are basically Frank Zappa, Robert Fripp, John McLaughlin, Bill Frisell, Al Di Meola. I don't know. They always switch, but Robert Fripp and Frank Zappa are always in that list of my top 5 players. Martin Barre, how do you say his name? Bear? I don't know. So always a great guitar player. I love his playing in Jethro Tull, and I think for him, I don't know much about him, like what his influences were, and I'm assuming Ian Anderson wrote a good amount of the material, so he definitely falls into that. But was it because he was just in a band with Ian Anderson? Would he have been doing kind of more of a blues rock thing? I don't know, but I've always liked his guitar playing, so definitely. John McLaughlin. So for me, personally, I have to differentiate that and make that definitely he's a fusion player, a jazz rock player, at least in that late 60s to the mid 70s, and then whatever jazz fusion became. So I don't disagree, but I don't agree. Jan Ackerman of Focus, absolutely. Have I listened to a lot of Focus? No, but we all know the few hits that they have, and I always thought they were super, super interesting. So kind of a cool player, but I've never delved into his catalog or what he's been doing recently. David Gilmour, sure. It'd be kind of hard to say he's not, I guess. Great band, great songwriter, great guitar player. He is somewhat different to me in the sense that if someone really wanted to narrow it down, as far as like, he's definitely got that really amazing blues angle, and he's super creative player. But Pink Floyd was never really one of those bands that had lush and great texture oriented stuff, so that's why I consider it prog rock. But as far as the guitar playing and instrumentation, there wasn't a lot of like instrumental kind of harmonization, or like repeating some really complicated riff or whatever. So I definitely think they're prog rock, but they're definitely in kind of an interesting kind of corner for sure. Todd Rundgren, I don't know. I don't never listen to Todd Rundgren. I've heard a couple of the hits. I defer to you to tell me whether or not he's a prog rock guitar player or not. Steve Hackett, absolutely. Genesis with Steve Hackett and even his solo stuff, I have never ever been able to embrace. I really, really appreciate it. It's super complex and really orchestrated, and the guitar is definitely a big part of that. Steve's playing, and he's definitely a unique player. But for whatever reason, Genesis never clicked with me. And I've really thought about it a lot. I've been listening to the records quite a bit and trying to figure out what is it about it that doesn't click for me. So if you're in that boat, please comment. If you're not, maybe give me your angle and let me know what you think about Steve Hackett. Again, I think Genesis is an incredible band. I weirdly like them more after Peter Gabriel quit. I love Peter Gabriel as a solo artist, but I don't know why, I like it as Phil Collins kind of took up the singing part. And as we know, that got really bad not that long after that. But I really appreciate those first 3 or 4 records of Genesis with Phil singing and, playing drums occasionally or whatever. So anyway, Steve Hackett, incredible player. And I always want to catch his tours through the States. He comes here quite a bit. I've never seen him, so I should do that soon. Mike Oldfield, absolutely. He definitely has really pushed, that kind of, whether it's Tubular Bells, which is obviously huge, and what's the Omadon. I never clicked with him, Omadon, and I got a bunch of those records, and they're really unique, really interesting, but for me, they just never worked. But he did, however, do this record with Gong, and I think it was a live record. I can't find it, so I might have been a bootleg, but I think it was half Alan Holdsworth, like as far as a vinyl record. Half was Alan Holdsworth on one side, and the other side was Mike Oldfield, and they were both super cool. And I love that kind of Pierre Moreland's Gong a lot. That's kind of one of my favorite kind of proggy fusion bands. They definitely straddle that kind of territory between what I consider fusion and prog rock. So again, it's probably a pretty fine line. So Steve Howe, absolutely one of the iconic players. Ironically, he is not one that I would say is an influence, but I love Yes, only second to King Crimson as far as prog rock goes. Adrian Belew, sure, yeah. I mean, considering his stuff with whether it's Laurie Anderson, Talking Heads, King Crimson, and Nine Inch Nails, and all the stuff he's done. Definitely his work in the late 70s and 80s, and Frank Zappa, really instrumental and really cool. And he added he made King Crimson great. And they wouldn't have done all those songs if Adrian wasn't there. However, I think they could have found another singer and done something differently, and it would still be King Crimson and prog rock. So I love Adrian's playing in that era for sure. And I'm going to see Beat in Las Vegas in a couple of months, so I'll be super excited to see how that goes with Steve Vai and Danny Carey, sorry, I said Dana, playing drums. Next on this list is Steve Hilliage, absolutely. Again, kind of more rooted in that psychedelic blues rock thing, but definitely some really interesting music for sure. Kerry Livgren from Kansas, sure. Love a couple of Kansas songs growing up, but I can't say, I've listened to a ton of Kansas, but I definitely feel like they fit in there for sure. Alex Lifeson, absolutely. I would say behind Frank Zappa and Robert Fripp, if you're going to ask me what are my kind of favorite, more in that rock or prog rock as far as guitar players, my top 5, Alex Lifeson would be 3. Alan Holdsworth would be in that list. He's next on this, and he would definitely be in that top 5 as well. What can you say? His stuff with Tony Williams and Gong and, Jean-Luc Ponty, although that's fusion, I think it's that Gong and Soft Machine that to me is that proggy end of stuff. And then he kind of accelerated. And I would even maybe consider the Tony Williams lifetime stuff proggy, but I consider that more like jazz rock. So anyway, but the stuff that Alan played with those bands and meaning Gong again and Soft Machine and specifically those records. There's a couple other things he did around that period I would consider prog. Uh, John Petrucci, yes, I'm not a fan of Dream Theater. Again, I don't doubt how amazing musicians they are. I did and have listened to a few records, and I've liked a few of them. I've long forgotten what they were, unfortunately. But yeah, anyway, I definitely consider them prog rock, though. Tosin Abasi, I'll leave that for you to decide because I would just say he's a modern guitar player. And I think that might be the delineating thing is when they're playing. Like, Tosin has been around maybe 10 years, maybe more, maybe less, I'm not sure. But I kind of see this as kind of cutting off in the basically, 90s is when prog rock, as far as guitar playing, that pure sense of it kind of morphed into other things. So anyway, so any of the players that are pretty new, I may not agree with. So Steve Wilson, absolutely. I remember when Porcupine Tree kind of came out, the first couple of records, really liked him. Great guitar player, amazing, musician and writer and all of that. I've not really heard anything or listened to anything in a long time though. So, but I definitely agree with that. Steve Morris, sure. The Dregs, Kansas, Deep Purple. That's definitely in those arenas to some degree. So I'll give him that. Steve Rothery from Marillion. I assume so. With Marillion, I've not heard much. I've heard great things. I just have never, ever really listened to them. Dweezil Zappa, I don't know. I mean, he's an incredible guitar player. Going to see him for the first time in a couple of years, in a couple of weeks, or yeah, like 2 months actually. So that'll be fun. I don't know if he fits in there or not. He's doing his dad's music, but as an individualistic player, super advanced player. But it's, yeah, okay, we'll call it prog rock after I think about it. Alan Morris, I am not familiar with him. I know about Spock's Beard. That's what they're referencing as far as the band. Sure. Guthrie Govan, sure. I'm not a huge fan of him, but a lot of these definitely fit in there. Omar Rodriguez Lopez from Mars Volta. Yeah, I might consider him that for sure. Another great, one of my favorite bands in that kind of idiom, kind of like King Gizzard, and just really interesting players. Yeah, so another player I just thought of is Matt Bellamy from Muse. I think if their earlier music is definitely in that prog arena. So yeah, there are some bands that kind of leach into the 2000s maybe, thinking out loud here. Mike Keneally, we know him of course from Frank's band and lots of other stuff. His solo records are pretty interesting and definitely in that prog arena. And that was the top 25. That went by really quick. So I think I was going to say, mention some other players. And that would be someone like, that dipped their toes in it, like a David Torn, Turjay Ripdahl, more of these kind of guys that lean more to experimental, that do stuff more in the kind of pseudo jazz area, Raul Bjorkenheim. But another guy that doesn't get mentioned in this, and there's only 25, so, how many can you mention, I guess? And the one I want to mention is Roger Trago, who was in Universe Zero and Present. And that's kind of like chamber rock, but Present is one of those amazingly unique bands that if you love dissonance and cool angular guitar playing, they were it. I mean, it's one of those records that if someone mentions prog rock and they're a sophisticated listener, I always bring it up. And Most times they know the records. There's only two that came out, and I think they were like the late 70s or I'm sorry, early 80s. And he did all sorts of stuff with Fred Frith, like guitars. There was a guitar quartet. I think it was, but in French it was called, or in English it would be called like the Guitarist of the Apocalypse or something like that. The Four Guitarist of the Apocalypse. And he did all sorts of stuff, and then they kind of regrouped and did a couple of records. So really, really important guitar player for prog rock. I think that is underappreciated. That whole French scene, whether it's Magma, Univers Zero, Present, I'm kind of blanking on the other ones that I never really listened much to, but there's some interesting players for sure and great, great music. So yeah, this goes on, this article, to mention future legends, and that remains to be seen. They mentioned Tom Moda. Don't know anything about him. Yvette Young, super interesting player. Um, I don't know. And then Cameron Maynard and Robbie Baca, the Contortionists. Never heard of them. Richard Marshall Hocken. I just did my first video of theirs, and I might consider that, to kind of fall into that territory. Pliny, no. Sasha Dumble from Intronaut, seen Intronaut a bunch of times. They definitely kind of fall into that area for sure. Aaron Marshall from Intervals. Now, these kind of players, I don't know. I would just consider it like super high level instrumental music with, a guitar focus or something. That doesn't make sense. But he's really great. Aaron Marshall's amazing. Manuel Gardner Fernandez from Unprocessed, another great player. These are all great players. Jason Richardson, incredible player. Rabia Masad, great player, sure. And then that's the end of the article. So let me know what you think. I love articles like this when they're talking about stuff that is in my wheelhouse. And if you're a fan of prog rock or even adventurous rock, stuff, and or even jazz rock, let me know what you think. That list was pretty good for like would be my top 25 outside of not mentioning Roger, which I totally get. He is definitely on the periphery and way down the list, unfortunately. I think where it gets murky is like you could say, Bill Frisell's done some proggy records ish, or Vernon Reid's solo stuff. That could be kind of proggy. It just has different elements of, not everything is from, that kind of Canterbury scene or, England or whatever. That tends to be where a lot of the great early prog bands are from. Another band they didn't mention is Gentle Giant. I don't know what the guitar player's name in that band is, but they are super, super cool. That's a band I kind of want to delve into more and more. Like Genesis, though, I think I would like Gentle Giant more if I really got into it. Uh, I think Gentle Giant is just one of those bands that is an anomaly. It's so sophisticated. Not unlike Genesis, but when I hear Gentle Giant, the kind of cool things, I really dig it. But they have a really interesting focus on the vocal ends of things. And that's kind of where these bands really differentiate themselves, the early prog bands, and ELP. And I guess you could say Greg Lake was a prog rock guitar player. He was definitely a great songwriter and singer and player and all of that. But ELP is another band that I like a few songs, but I never really got into it. But when you talk about King Crimson being Greg Lake singing, Ian Anderson, I guess, does like a song, but it's Greg Lake, and then who sings after that? On Islands, I'm not sure who that was. Was that Boz Burrell or something? I think it might have been him playing bass. Then, of course, we have John Wetton, which for the three records that John Wetton sang on, and then to go into UK, I would consider UK a progressive rock band with Alan in it. So that's a recording I kind of forgot about. Oh, and the Bruford stuff with Alan Holsworth. Those are great records as well. And I would consider those prog rock. Um, but yeah, so definitely some cool players. And as far as, again, with John Wetton singing, incredible singer. And then you have Peter Gabriel with Genesis. And so there are these really iconic, interesting takes on singing, and like the whole narrative of the song is kind of shaped by them. Early King Crimson, all the words were written by Peter Sinfeld, or whatever his name is. I can never remember how to pronounce the last name. I don't know about the John Wetton stuff. I don't know if he composed the lyrics, but they're very different than the stuff that Greg Lake was singing. These were more stripped down, a little more simplistic or something, with John Wetton singing them. Adrian Belew, super creative. I mean, his vocal stuff made that King Crimson, the 80s King Crimson, really stand out for sure. Such a kind of cool, quirky, funny, engaging kind of storytelling, or whatever you want to say, and just really fit the music and kind of gave it that little lift above. Had someone been more esoteric with the lyrics or something, it might not have that same pop. But just because he's such a great front man and so kind of buoyant and kind of energetic, even today. I just saw him not that long ago with the Jerry Harrison thing, and Adrian sounds as good, or if not better, than I've ever heard, and singing as well. And I think he's around 70. So anyway, all that said, here we go. Guitar player, top 25 prog players, and then it mentioned 10 kind of up and coming players, which, I hope so. I hope so. I appreciate you watching this, and please comment, like, and subscribe. See you soon.